Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. It's time for another armor discussion video in Path of Exile 2. It is a pretty funny one. The armor saga continues. Now, it certainly will look like I'm just milking this thing for content like crazy, and in one hand, I am really glad that it just keeps constantly falling into my lap. Some of the news that broke out yesterday was pretty much right when they announced the changes for the upcoming Path of Exile 2 update, so a lot of this got buried. I tried to up visibility on my Twitter account, but, that only goes so far. It actually turns out that armor is even worse than we had thought. And it is a pretty startling discussion. And I really wanted to go over it because on one hand, it's cool to kind of see how these mechanics actually work in Path of Exile 2. And for people that haven't really dived like crazy into Path of Exile 1, it is kind of learning experience to see how these mechanics function to begin with. So in the game, we have these we have like a skill, we have the heat proofing on the passive tree, we have the black braid armor. So armor applies to elemental damage. So the armor crew, they just, the copium bros, they wouldn't let it go. They were like, yeah, but you can still use armor to mitigate elementals, so it's pretty good. And honestly, I actually made my first character with heat proofing. The node on the passive tree that stands out because 25% of your armor also applies to fire damage taken from hits. Wow, that sounds really good because, normally in Path of Exile 1, the way this will work is your fire resistance is applied to the fire damage, and then the armor application to resist, and these mechanics do exist in Path of Exile 1, apply afterwards. And why is that important? Because if you haven't kept up with the whole armor discussion, the way armor works in Path of Exile 2 is the bigger the hit, the less is mitigated as a percentage. So for example, if you have 10,000 armor, if you get hit for 50 damage, you mitigate 90%. But if you get hit for 5,000 damage, you only mitigate 14%. So this is actually significant because the ordering of armor being applied after resistances actually makes armor pretty good. Because if you have high resistances, you already make the hit really small, and armor is good at mitigating small hits. However, and unfortunately for armor once again, it turns out that Entity Black 1 has done a little bit of digging, a little bit of research, and has posted a little bit of proof. I will link this Reddit thread for you guys. He also did some testing with Black Braid, this armor that I showcased. Armor applies to elemental damage, and it appears that the armor is being applied to the elemental damage before the resist, which is not like how it works in Path of Exile 1. And I did mention on Twitter that this makes armor pretty much completely worthless for mitigating elemental damage. And in this video, I aim to show you guys why this is the case. Entity Black also, he went the extra mile and tested to see if Black Braid actually works with the heat proofing, and it doesn't, so you cannot have more than 100% of your armor applied to elemental damage reduction. And the main issue here that I think will kind of fly over people's head is that physical damage and elemental damage do not come in equal proportions in Path of Exile. And that's certainly true for Path of Exile 2. When I showed you guys some rough calculations on armor applying to physical damage, I showed hits in the 5,000 area. The thing about hits that are not physical is that they are a lot higher. If we take a look at the Arbiter of Ash, so his physical hits are like 2,000 or 1,800, but his fire hits, and these are things he does all the time, they're like up to 9,000. And there's even a comical one here. He actually has some overwhelmed physical on his small things. This thing, 39, so this one's not survivable, but 39,000 fire damage is actually survivable because it's not like armor. It's not like your resist gets smashed by a high hit. Your fire resistance, even if it's at 75, means that you'll survive this if you have 10,000 life. 10,000 energy shield, because that's the only way that you can get that high of a pool. However, when the armor is being applied to, let's not even go with that value. Let's go with a value like this one. So a 9,000 fire hit, okay? And we have to be mindful that it's not all of your armor that's being applied to it. Okay, so 25% of your armor is being applied to the fire damage from hit. We actually have a chart for armor in Path of Exile 2. It looks like we have dived into it. I also want to point out that armor is being buffed in the next Path of Exile update. We don't exactly know what it means, but they said that armor is being buffed by about 15%. So it's going to be very, very slightly stronger, just a teeny bit stronger. In my opinion, it will do absolutely nothing. But yes, there's other ways to make defenses on your characters. Just typically armor is not a great one. So this is for physical mitigation, but if we have, again, the heat proofing, 25% of your armor will be applied to fire damage. But in Path of Exile 2, it's before the resistances are applied. So let's kind of just do a little bit of looking at this chart here. So let's say you are a Giga Chad warrior, absolute brute force, moving heavy metal, barely walking with your heavily reduced movement speed, sporting 30,000 armor proudly in the face of people saying it's bad. Your hipster is off the charts. You got 30,000 armor. So how much of that will actually work if you have heat proofing? And again, heat proofing is like node. It's 4 points. These are armor percent nodes, which are also known as not good nodes. And you also often have to travel to this node also. So it's for some characters 5 points because you get a jewel socket, maybe not, but it's always going to be at least 4 points to actually activate this bonus. This is pretty important, okay? Well, I'm getting somewhere with this. So if you have 30,000 armor, and let's say that 25% of it is being applied to physical damage, to fire damage, it's the equivalent of having 7,500 armor if 100% of it, because that is a quarter of your armor, right? So 7,500 armor being applied to a hit of 9,000, it's literally off the chart. It's literally off the chart, okay? So it's probably not even 8% here. It's probably in the 5% area. All right. So that, again, that's if you have 30,000 armor. That's you invest the passive trait to get heat proofing. The fire hit before the resistances are applied is going to be reduced by somewhere between 5 and 8% from the actual things that will kill you in this game. Now, I do want to kind of point that out because it's not just about these nodes. There are other ways to mitigate fire damage in Path of Exile. While there are some weaknesses to maximum resist because they can be penetrated by some map modifiers in Path of Exile 2, generally speaking, 1% maximum fire resist. And while maximum fire resist can help mitigate damage, it actually doesn't help armor as it does in Path of Exile 1, because if you have a lot of fire resist, let's say you have 90 fire resist, in Path of Exile 1, the resulting hit after fire resist is even smaller, so armor is even better. But in Path of Exile 2, that's not the case because the resistance is applied afterwards. So having max fire resist does not help you with heat proofing at all. But if you just get 1% fire resist, how much damage is mitigated? It also depends on how much fire resist you have. If you have 89 fire resist and this 1% brings you to 90, that is like 9% less fire damage taken. And that's actually really good. But if you have 75, this is equivalent to about 4% fire damage mitigation. And again, if we go to the chart, if you're a Giga Chad with 30,000 armor, from the highest, fire hits from the bosses, but there are really high hits in maps too, just to be fair. Actually, I've actually been one-shotted on my main character. I got hit for 10,000 damage from a boss doing a melee attack that was fire-based. Just throwing that in there. It's not just the endgame bosses. So, yes, it looks like if you have 30,000 armor, it's like a tiny bit more mitigation. But again, it takes 4 points as opposed to just getting 1% fire resistance. Now, maximum resists can also be found on the runes. If you get the ones that are specific, the cores from the ultimatum mechanic, you can actually get maximum fire resist in one of those slots. So you don't even need to spend a point on the passive tree. And there are other ways, even here, 2% max fire resist for every 40 uncapped fire resist. So if you have 80, instead of like 75, this will actually give you 4 max fire resist. Let alone these nodes also give you maximum resistance. The other thing about resistances is that it applies to all the damage that you take. And an element such as fire actually does come into it does come into damage that are not hits. So heat proofing is the damage applies for hit damage. What would be not hit damage? Like burning ground, like an ignite resulting from a hit. So even though heat proofing with a really high armor stacking character can provide about the same benefit as 1% maximum fire resist. Again, it doesn't actually apply to all of the fire damage your character might be taking, while maximum fire resists do. The takeaway is that, in my opinion, heatproofing is absolutely and utterly worthless. If you are playing an armor stacker for some masochistic reasons, still, in Path of Exile 2, it's actually still not worth getting. It's literally just always worth going a natural resistance, and debatedly, it's worth it to just get plain 1% max resist nodes, because they'll lead to the 1% max all resistances, which is actually going to increase your survivability. So, well, the armor train continues. I hope this has been an educational video. And look, I kind of hope there aren't more videos like this one, but it seems like every discovery in this space of armor in Path of Exile 2 seems to be against it being good whatsoever. And this really is nail in the coffin, because at this point, there's pretty much zero reason to invest in armor, and a 15% buff? Yeah, I don't think so. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.